My brother David stood in the middle of my grandmother's dining room, his Rolex catching the candlelight as he gestured dismissively at my thrift store sweater, announcing to the entire family that I was the charity case who couldn't even afford a proper Thanksgiving outfit. 20 minutes later, his wife Jessica was staring at her phone in absolute horror, her face drained of all color as she read the company-wide email introducing their new regional director. The look of pure panic when she realized the broke little sister was now her direct supervisor? Absolutely priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air carried the familiar scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey as I pulled my 10-year-old Honda Civic into the circular driveway of my grandmother's sprawling colonial home in Westfield. The house had been the gathering place for Thanksgiving, dinner for as long as I could remember, its warm yellow clapboard siding and wraparound porch representing everything stable and enduring about our family traditions. Today, however, stepping out of my modest car while David's gleaming BMW X7 dominated the prime parking spot near the front entrance, I felt the familiar weight of unspoken comparisons that had defined our sibling relationship for the past decade. At 32, I had grown accustomed to being the family disappointment, the one who had somehow failed to achieve the obvious markers of success that everyone expected. While David had followed the prescribed path from prestigious university to corporate law firm to partnership, I had seemingly drifted through a series of unremarkable jobs, living in a cramped studio apartment and driving a car that required monthly prayers to start reliably. The narrative had been established so thoroughly that I had almost begun to believe it myself, forgetting that appearances could be deliberately cultivated to serve purposes that others couldn't perceive. My grandmother, Evelyn, greeted me at the daughter with her characteristic warmth, her silver hair perfectly styled despite her 84 years, her eyes bright with genuine affection. "There's my sweet Emma," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and vanilla. "You look lovely, dear. I don't care what anyone says about those fancy clothes. There's something to be said for a woman who chooses comfort over pretense." The comment was innocent enough, but it carried an undercurrent of awareness about the family dynamics that would unfold over the next few hours. Grandmother had always been perceptive about the subtle cruelties that passed for normal family interaction, though she had learned over the years that direct intervention often caused more problems than it solved. "Thank you, Grandma," I replied, genuinely grateful for her unconditional acceptance. "I brought your favorite cranberry bread from Morrison's Bakery, the one with the orange zest that you always talk about." Her face lit up with delight. "Oh, you didn't have to do that, sweetheart. That bakery is so expensive." She paused, studying my face with the intuition that came from decades of loving observation. "Are you sure you can afford such extravagances? I worry about you sometimes, living in that tiny apartment, working those odd jobs." The concern was genuine, rooted in love rather than judgment, which made it both touching and painful. My grandmother truly believed that I was struggling financially, because that was the carefully constructed image I had maintained for reasons that would soon become clear. The sacrifices required to maintain this facade had been considerable, but they were about to pay dividends that no one in my family could possibly anticipate. "I'm managing just fine," I assured her, which was technically true, though she couldn't have imagined the full scope of what managing actually entailed in my case. "Besides, you deserve the best cranberry bread money can buy." As we entered the living room, the familiar tableau of family gathering was already well established. My parents, Robert and Linda, occupied their traditional positions near the fireplace, my father reading his newspaper while my mother coordinated last-minute dinner preparations. My Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom had claimed the sofa, engaged in their annual discussion about property values in their affluent suburb. The atmosphere hummed with the comfortable rhythms of people who had gathered in this same configuration for countless holidays, each person settling into roles that had been established through years of repetition. David dominated the center of the room, as he had since childhood, his presence commanding attention even when he wasn't actively speaking. At 35, he had aged into his success gracefully, his thick, dark hair still without gray, his expensive suit tailored perfectly to his athletic frame. He possessed the easy confidence that came from never having experienced significant setbacks, the casual assumption that the world would continue to arrange itself according to his expectations. Beside him sat Jessica, his wife of 3 years, a woman whose polished appearance and nervous energy suggested someone still adjusting to the social requirements of her elevated position. At 29, she was undeniably beautiful, with blonde hair that fell in perfect waves and a wardrobe that reflected both taste and substantial financial resources. Yet there was something tentative about her participation in family conversations, as if she remained uncertain about her place in the established hierarchy. "Emma," David's voice carried across the room with the hearty enthusiasm he typically reserved for public displays of brotherly affection. "There she is, our little artist. Still pursuing your creative dreams, I see." The comment was delivered with a smile, but anyone familiar with David's communication style could detect the subtle condescension embedded in his tone. The word little wasn't merely a reference to our age difference, but a diminutive that reduced my choices to childish whims rather than legitimate pursuits. "Something like that," I replied with equal casualness, settling into the armchair that had always been my designated spot during family gatherings. The chair was positioned slightly apart from the main seating area, a physical manifestation of my role as family observer rather than central participant. "Still finding my way. You know how it is." Jessica looked up from her phone, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "David mentioned you're working at that coffee shop downtown. That must be interesting, meeting all kinds of people." Her tone carried the carefully neutral quality of someone trying to make conversation while navigating potentially sensitive territory. She had learned, through 3 years of family gatherings, that discussions of my employment situation required delicate handling. "Very interesting," I confirmed, appreciating her attempt at diplomatic engagement. "You'd be surprised how much you can learn about people when you're serving them their morning caffeine. Everyone drops their guard eventually, when they need their coffee fix badly enough." David laughed, the sound containing more edge than humor. "Emma's become quite the philosopher during her barista career. Next thing we know, she'll be writing the great American novel on napkins between customers." The comment drew chuckles from around the room, though I noticed my grandmother's expression remained neutral, her sharp eyes moving between David and me with growing concern. "Actually," my mother interjected, clearly hoping to redirect the conversation away from potentially uncomfortable territory, "Emma has been helping me with some of my charity work. She's been absolutely invaluable with the literacy program at the community center. She has such a way with people." The attempt at deflection was well-intentioned but ultimately counterproductive, as it reinforced the narrative that my contributions existed primarily in the realm of volunteer work rather than professional achievement. David seized on the IC opening with the instinctive timing of someone accustomed to controlling conversational flow. "That's wonderful," he said, his tone suggesting patronizing approval. "Community service is so important. It's great that Emma has found ways to give back, especially since she has more flexible time than those of us tied down by demanding careers." He gestured broadly, encompassing the room as if to include everyone except me in the category of serious professionals. "Jessica and I barely have time for volunteer work these days. Between my caseload and her position at Morrison Development, we're lucky to catch our breath on weekends." The comment was calculated to highlight the contrast between their important, time-consuming careers and my presumably less demanding schedule. It was a subtle form of aggression, wrapped in the language of explanation rather than direct attack, which made it difficult to challenge without appearing overly sensitive. Jessica nodded in agreement, though her expression suggested some discomfort, with being used as supporting evidence for David's point. "The development industry has been incredibly busy lately. We're managing 3 major projects simultaneously, and the client demands are intense. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in deadlines and budget meetings. What kind of projects are you working on? I asked, genuinely curious despite the context in which the information was being shared. Professional interest had a way of transcending family politics, at least temporarily. Mostly commercial developments, Jessica replied, warming to the subject in a way that suggested she rarely had opportunities to discuss her work with family members. Office complexes, retail centers, mixed-use facilities. We're the primary development firm for several major corporate relocations happening in the region. It's exciting work, but the pressure is constant. That does sound demanding, I acknowledged, filing away this information for future reference. The commercial real estate market has been particularly volatile lately. Managing multiple large-scale projects simultaneously must require exceptional organizational skills. David looked mildly surprised by my knowledgeable response, as if he had forgotten that I might possess understanding of business concepts beyond coffee preparation. Emma's always been good with details, he said, the comment carrying faint praise while simultaneously diminishing the scope of my capabilities to minor administrative skills. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Attention to detail is crucial in development work, Jessica agreed, apparently unaware of the subtle dismissiveness in her husband's framing. One small oversight can cascade into major problems when you're coordinating contractors, permits, financing, and client expectations across multiple timelines. The conversation continued in this vein for several more minutes, with David periodically steering discussion toward his own professional achievements while using my apparent lack of career progress as a backdrop that highlighted his success. It was a performance he had perfected over years of family gatherings, subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation while effectively establishing the hierarchy he preferred. My Aunt Sarah, perhaps sensing the undercurrent of tension, attempted to shift focus to safer territory. Emma, dear, are you seeing anyone special these days? You're such a lovely girl. I'm sure there must be someone who appreciates your artistic sensibilities. The question, while well-meaning, opened another avenue for unfavorable comparison. David and Jessica's marriage represented the kind of partnership that family members understood and celebrated. 2 successful professionals, building a life together based on shared ambitions and complementary achievements. My dating life, by contrast, appeared to consist of casual relationships with similarly underachieving individuals who lacked the stability and prospects that would merit serious family discussion. I'm focusing on other priorities right now, I replied diplomatically, which was both true and completely misleading in ways that my family couldn't possibly understand. Romance tends to complicate things when you're still figuring out your direction in life. David seized on this opening with obvious relish. That's probably wise, he said, nodding sagely as if dispensing valuable counsel. Better to get your career sorted out before adding relationship complications. Jessica and I were both established professionally when we met, which made building our partnership much more straightforward. When you're both contributing equally, decisions about the future become much clearer. The implication was unmistakable. My romantic prospects remained limited because I lacked the professional foundation necessary for serious partnership with an accomplished individual. I was essentially being advised to postpone adult relationships until I had achieved the kind of success that would make me worthy of consideration by someone like David himself. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing that her husband's advice carried implications about her own value being tied to professional achievement rather than personal qualities. I think love is more complicated than career compatibility, she offered tentatively. Sometimes the most unexpected partnerships turn out to be the strongest. True, David conceded with the magnanimous air of someone willing to acknowledge alternative viewpoints while maintaining confidence in his own superior judgment. But practical considerations matter too. Financial stress, career uncertainty, different lifestyle expectations. These things create pressure that can undermine even strong emotional connections. The lecture continued for several more minutes, with David expanding on his theories about successful relationships while using his own marriage as the primary example of proper partnership construction. I listened with apparent interest while privately marveling at his complete lack of awareness about the actual dynamics operating beneath the surface of our family gathering. What David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his entire performance was being observed and cataloged by someone who understood power dynamics far better than he imagined. His assumption that I represented no threat to his position as family success story had blinded him to possibilities that existed beyond his narrow conception of achievement and influence. The conversation was interrupted by my grandmother's announcement that dinner was ready, prompting the familiar migration from living room to dining room. The transition provided temporary relief from the intensity of family analysis, replaced by the more neutral territory of food appreciation and general catching up with extended family members who attended only major holidays. As we settled around the dining room table, with its elaborate place settings and centerpiece arrangement of autumn flowers, I found myself positioned between my Uncle Tom and my cousin Michael, while David and Jessica occupied places of honor near my grandmother's chair. The seating arrangement reflected family hierarchy as clearly as any organizational chart, with proximity to the head of the table serving as a measure of perceived importance and achievement. My grandmother delivered her traditional Thanksgiving blessing, expressing gratitude for family togetherness and the abundance that allowed us to gather in comfort and security. Her words carried particular poignancy this year, as I reflected on the complex definitions of abundance and security that would soon be redefined for everyone present. The meal proceeded through its familiar phases, with conversation flowing across topics that ranged from safe observations about the weather to carefully neutral discussions of current events. David held court throughout, sharing anecdotes from his legal practice while offering opinions on everything from local politics to investment strategies. His commentary was received with the respectful attention accorded to the family's recognized expert on matters of business and professional success. The Peterson case finally settled last week, he announced during the main course, cutting his turkey with precise movements that somehow managed to convey competence and authority. 6 months of negotiations, but we managed to secure terms that exceeded our client's expectations by nearly 40%. Sometimes persistence pays off when you're dealing with opposing counsel who doesn't fully understand the strength of your position. The story continued for several minutes, with David providing enough detail to demonstrate his expertise while remaining sufficiently vague to maintain client confidentiality. It was a skilled performance, designed to educate his audience about his professional capabilities while reinforcing his status as the family member whose career merited serious discussion and admiration. "That's wonderful, dear," my mother said, her pride evident in both tone and expression. "It must be so satisfying to achieve results like that for your clients. All those years of law school and hard work really paying off." "It's what I trained for," David replied with becoming modesty. "Though I have to say, success in law is as much about strategic thinking and relationship building as it is about legal knowledge. You need to understand people, anticipate their moves, position yourself advantageously before negotiations even begin." I nodded in agreement, recognizing the truth in his analysis, while privately appreciating the irony of his expertise in strategic positioning being applied so narrowly to his professional life, while remaining completely absent from his understanding of family dynamics. "Emma would probably be good at that," Jessica offered unexpectedly, her comment drawing surprised attention from around the table. "She's always been observant about people. I remember last Christmas when she predicted exactly how that argument between Uncle Paul and Aunt Margaret would develop, even before they started disagreeing. The observation was accurate and surprisingly perceptive, suggesting that Jessica had been paying more attention to family interactions than I had realized. Her willingness to offer this assessment, despite the potential for diminishing her husband's unique claim to strategic insight, indicated either genuine appreciation for my capabilities or perhaps some unconscious desire to challenge David's monopoly on family recognition. David looked mildly annoyed by the suggestion that my skills might overlap with his own professional strengths. People skills are certainly valuable, he acknowledged with careful diplomacy, though applying them in a legal context requires specific training and experience that goes beyond general observation. The stakes are quite different when clients are depending on you for outcomes that affect their livelihoods and futures. The subtle dismissal was delivered with practiced smoothness, redirecting attention away from any suggestion that my capabilities might translate to serious professional application. It was a defensive maneuver disguised as educational clarification, designed to maintain the established boundaries between his expertise and my amateur insights. Of course, Jessica agreed quickly, perhaps realizing that her comment had inadvertently challenged the conversational hierarchy her husband preferred to maintain. I didn't mean to suggest that Emma could just jump into legal practice. I was just noting that she has good instincts about people. The moment passed, absorbed into the general flow of dinner conversation, but I filed it away as evidence of dynamics operating beneath the surface of David and Jessica's apparently harmonious partnership. Her quick retreat from her original observation suggested awareness of boundaries that she had temporarily crossed, indicating that their relationship might contain more complex power negotiations than were immediately apparent. As the meal progressed toward dessert, David launched into what had become his traditional Thanksgiving speech about family success and achievement. It was a performance he had refined over several years, ostensibly celebrating everyone's accomplishments, while managing to highlight his own achievements as the family's primary example of realized potential. I think it's important to acknowledge, he began, settling back in his chair with the confident posture of someone preparing to deliver meaningful insights, how fortunate we are to have the opportunities that previous generations worked so hard to provide. Our parents and grandparents made sacrifices so that we could pursue education and careers that might not have been possible for them. The sentiment was unexceptionable, even admirable, and it drew nodding agreement from around the table. My grandmother smiled with particular warmth, having lived through economic hardships that made our current comfort seem almost miraculous by comparison. At the same time, David continued, I think we have a responsibility to make the most of those opportunities, to achieve things that justify the investments that were made in our futures. Success isn't just personal satisfaction. It's how we honor the people who believed in us and made our achievements possible. Again, the logic was sound and the sentiment praiseworthy. The implicit message, however, was becoming increasingly clear as David's gaze moved meaningfully in my direction during his discussion of unfulfilled potential and wasted opportunities. Some of us have been more successful than others in translating our advantages into concrete achievements, he said, his tone remaining carefully neutral, while his meaning grew increasingly pointed. But I think it's never too late to reassess priorities and make changes that lead to more meaningful outcomes. My Uncle Tom, perhaps sensing the direction of David's commentary, attempted to broaden the discussion. Success means different things to different people, he offered diplomatically. Financial achievement is important, certainly, but there are other ways to contribute meaningfully to society and family. David nodded in acknowledgement of this perspective while clearly preparing to refine his argument in ways that would address such objections. Absolutely true, he agreed. And I don't want to suggest that financial success is the only measure of a life well lived. But I do think there's something to be said for using our talents and education to their fullest potential, rather than settling for situations that don't challenge us or utilize our capabilities. The word settling hung in the air with unmistakable significance, as David's eyes again moved toward me with pointed meaning. The message was now explicit enough that everyone at the table could understand his target, though wrapped in language sufficiently general to maintain plausible deniability about direct personal attack. Emma, for instance, he said, finally abandoning subtlety in favor of direct address, has always been incredibly bright and capable. Top of her class in high school, excellent college performance, graduate degree in business administration. She has all the tools necessary for significant professional achievement. The setup was delivered with apparent praise, creating a foundation that would make his subsequent criticism seem more concerned than cruel. It was a rhetorical technique he had undoubtedly perfected in legal practice, establishing credibility through initial agreement before introducing contradictory evidence, which makes it somewhat puzzling, he continued, to see her working in service positions that don't really utilize her education or challenge her intellectually. I worry that she's developed a pattern of underachievement that could become increasingly difficult to break as time passes. The attack was now fully explicit, delivered with clinical precision in front of the entire family. David had chosen Thanksgiving dinner as the venue for a public intervention designed to shame me into conforming to his definitions of appropriate success and ambition. My grandmother's expression had shifted from warm holiday contentment to obvious distress, her eyes moving between David and me with growing concern about the turn in conversation. My parents looked similarly uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to both children while lacking the tools to effectively intervene in what had become a family confrontation. Jessica appeared genuinely shocked by her husband's aggressive tactics, her face reflecting confusion about whether she should attempt to moderate his comments or simply observe the family dynamics she was still learning to navigate. "I appreciate your concern," I replied calmly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice despite the public nature of David's assault. "Though I think you might be operating with incomplete information about my current situation and future plans." David's eyebrows rose slightly, as if my response had confirmed his suspicions about my tendency toward self-deception and unrealistic thinking. "I hope so," he said with patronizing sympathy. "I really do. Because from the outside, it looks like someone with tremendous potential who's somehow lost direction and settled for a lifestyle that doesn't reflect her capabilities." He paused, gathering momentum for what was clearly intended as his concluding argument. "I mean, Emma, you're 32 years old. Most people your age with your education are well established in careers that provide financial security and professional growth. Instead, you're living in a studio apartment, driving a car that should have been replaced years ago, working part-time jobs that teenagers typically use to earn spending money." The litany of my apparent failures was delivered with the measured precision of a closing argument, each point building toward an inescapable conclusion about my inadequacy compared to normal adult expectations. "Maybe it's time to acknowledge that the artistic pursuit approach isn't working," he continued relentlessly. "Maybe it's time to make some practical decisions about employment and lifestyle that reflect your actual age and responsibilities rather than some fantasy about creative fulfillment." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable, with every person at the table acutely aware that we had moved far beyond normal family conversation into territory that would have lasting consequences for our relationships and family dynamics. I looked around the table, taking in the concerned faces of people I loved, people who had been inadvertently drawn into David's performance of superiority at my expense. My grandmother's eyes held a mixture of sadness and anger that I had rarely seen directed at any family member. My parents appeared stricken by the realization that their Thanksgiving gathering had become the venue for public humiliation of one child by another. Jessica looked genuinely distressed, perhaps recognizing that her husband's behavior reflected poorly on his character, while simultaneously wondering if his assessment of my situation might be accurate enough to justify his harsh intervention. "You know, David," I said finally, setting down my fork and meeting his gaze directly. "You're absolutely right about one thing. It is time to acknowledge some realities that haven't been fully discussed." Something in my tone caused his expression to shift slightly, a flicker of uncertainty replacing the confident satisfaction he had displayed throughout his speech. "The reality is," I continued, "that you've built your entire sense of superiority on assumptions about my life that are I paused, choosing my words carefully, significantly incomplete. David's frown deepened, clearly sensing that the conversation was not proceeding according to his expectations, but lacking sufficient information to adjust his strategy effectively. The reality is that sometimes people have reasons for maintaining certain appearances that others don't understand. Sometimes the story that everyone believes isn't the story that's actually true. I reached for my purse, retrieving my phone with deliberate slowness while maintaining eye contact with my brother. Sometimes the person everyone thinks they understand completely is actually someone entirely different. The table had gone completely silent, with every person focused intently on the exchange that was clearly approaching some kind of climax or revelation. For instance, I said, unlocking my phone and beginning to scroll through my email, reality might be that the person you've been lecturing about underachievement and wasted potential has been somewhat more successful than appearances might suggest. David's confidence was now visibly shaken, his earlier certainty replaced by obvious confusion about where my response was leading. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her attention fully captured by the unexpected turn in conversation. Reality might be, I continued, still scrolling through my phone as if searching for something specific, that the broke little sister working in coffee shops has actually been building something that nobody in this room knows anything about. I found what I was looking for and looked up at David with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. Reality might be that your wife Jessica is about to receive some very interesting news about her professional future, news that might change her perspective on exactly who in this family has achieved meaningful success. The color began to drain from Jessica's face as she reached instinctively for her own phone, clearly sensing that whatever I was about to reveal would directly affect her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. You see, David, I said, my voice carrying a quiet intensity that commanded absolute attention from everyone present. While you've been building your legal career and congratulating yourself on your superior life choices, I've been building something else entirely, something that your wife Jessica is going to learn about very, very soon. The transformation in the room's atmosphere was complete and electric, with every person recognizing that we had reached a moment of revelation that would fundamentally alter our understanding of family dynamics and individual achievements. David's expression had shifted from confident superiority to genuine concern, while Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone for the message that I had implied would soon arrive. The afternoon light streaming through my grandmother's dining room windows suddenly seemed brighter and more focused, illuminating faces that reflected anticipation, confusion, and growing awareness that Thanksgiving dinner 2023 would be remembered as the day when everything they thought they knew about Emma Parker proved to be completely and utterly wrong. Jessica's phone buzzed against the polished mahogany table with the distinctive chime of a priority email notification. The sound cut through the tense silence like a blade, causing her to fumble slightly as she reached for the device. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the screen, and I watched with carefully concealed satisfaction as her eyes began to scan the message that would transform her understanding of everything she thought she knew about her professional world. The color drained from Jessica's face so rapidly that my Uncle Tom leaned forward with concern. "Are you all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her gaze moving frantically between her phone screen and my face as she struggled to process the information she was reading. David, sensing his wife's distress but lacking context for its source, reached over to touch her shoulder with growing alarm. "Jess? What's wrong? Is it work? Your mother?" She continued staring at her phone, reading and rereading the message as if repetition might somehow alter its contents. "I don't understand," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible above the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. "This can't be right. There must be some mistake." My grandmother's sharp eyes moved between Jessica's obvious shock and my composed expression with the intuitive awareness that came from decades of observing family dynamics. "Emma, dear," she said gently but firmly, "perhaps you'd like to explain what's happening here." I set my napkin beside my plate with deliberate precision, enjoying the moment of absolute attention that my earlier hint had created. Every person at the table was focused entirely on me, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of Jessica's reaction and my cryptic comments about professional revelations. "Well," I began, settling back in my chair with the relaxed posture of someone finally free to abandon a carefully maintained facade, "it seems Jessica has just received an email from Morrison Development's parent company, Titan Construction Group, announcing some significant changes in their regional management structure." David's frown deepened as he tried to connect his wife's employment situation with anything I might know about corporate restructuring in the construction industry. "How could you possibly know about internal changes at Jessica's company? You work at a coffee shop." The question was delivered with his characteristic condescension, but underneath I detected the first notes of genuine uncertainty. Something in my demeanor had shifted in ways that didn't align with his established understanding of my capabilities and connections. "That's an excellent question, David," I replied, allowing my smile to broaden slightly. "One that Jessica is probably asking herself right about now as she reads about the appointment of their new regional director of operations, someone who will be overseeing all current development projects and making crucial decisions about staffing and resource allocation." Jessica's hands were shaking visibly now as she looked up from her phone, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Emma?" she said slowly, as if testing the reality of what she was about to say. "The email says the new regional director is someone named E.M. Parker. That can't possibly be you. You're a barista." The moment had arrived, the culmination of months of careful planning and strategic positioning that none of them could have imagined. I reached into my purse and withdrew a leather business card holder, removing a crisp white card that I placed on the table where everyone could see. Actually," I said, my voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced all other conversation. "I'm Emma Michelle Parker, Regional Director of Operations for Titan Construction Group, overseeing commercial development projects across 6 states, with particular responsibility for major corporate relocations and mixed-use facilities." The business card lay on the table like a small explosive device, its elegant typography and corporate logo completely at odds with every assumption my family had made about my professional life. David reached for it with obvious disbelief, studying the embossed text as if it might be an elaborate forgery. "Titan Construction Group," he read aloud, his voice flat with shock. "Regional Director of Operations, Emma M. Parker." He looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before, confusion mixed with something that might have been fear. "This is impossible. You've been working at Central Perk Coffee for the past 2 years. "Actually," I corrected gently, "I've been working remotely for Titan while maintaining a part-time position at Central Perk as cover for my real activities in this region. You'd be surprised how useful it is to have a public-facing job that allows you to observe local business patterns while maintaining a low profile during strategic planning phases." My mother's voice cut through the stunned silence with characteristic directness. "Emma, what are you talking about? Are you saying you've been lying to us about your job for 2 years?" The question carried hurt along with confusion, and I felt a pang of genuine regret about the deception that had been necessary to protect my real objectives. "Not lying exactly, Mom. More like allowing you to draw conclusions that I didn't correct. I do work at the coffee shop. I just have other responsibilities that I haven't discussed with the family." Jessica was scrolling frantically through her phone now, apparently accessing her company's internal directory to verify information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about corporate hierarchy. "The bio says you have an MBA from Northwestern and 15 years of experience in commercial development and project management. It lists major projects in Chicago, Atlanta, and Denver. This has to be a mistake, a coincidence. Someone else with the same name." I pulled out my phone and opened the LinkedIn app, navigating to my professional profile and sliding the device across the table to Jessica. "Check the photo," I suggested mildly. I think you'll find it's definitely me." The color that had briefly returned to Jessica's face drained away again as she confirmed that the accomplished executive in the professional headshot was unmistakably the same person she had been condescendingly pitying for her lack of career success just minutes earlier. "I don't understand," David said, his legal training asserting itself as he attempted to construct a logical framework for information that defied his existing beliefs. "If this is true, if you actually have this position, why would you let us think you were struggling financially? Why the apartment, the old car, the part-time jobs?" It was the question I had been anticipating, the one that would require me to explain strategic thinking that went far beyond anything David had imagined I was capable of. Because, dear brother, successful intelligence gathering requires authentic cover that stands up to casual scrutiny. For the past 18 months, Titan has been evaluating this region for major expansion, including the potential acquisition of smaller development firms that could provide local market expertise and established client relationships. I paused, allowing the implications to settle before continuing. Morrison Development, Jessica's company, has been on our acquisition list from the beginning. My job has been to conduct comprehensive assessment of their operations, management, structure, project quality, and overall suitability for integration into Titan's regional strategy. Jessica's phone clattered against the table as the full scope of what I was revealing became clear. "You've been spying on my company? On me?" "I've been conducting legitimate business intelligence," I corrected. "Everything I've learned has been through public records, industry networking, and casual conversation that you voluntarily shared during family gatherings. You'd be amazed how much useful information people provide when they think they're talking to someone who couldn't possibly be professionally relevant." The accusation in Jessica's voice carried genuine betrayal, and I understood her reaction even as I prepared to deliver information that would make her current distress seem minor by comparison. "For instance, your detailed descriptions of Morrison's current projects gave me excellent insight into their operational capabilities and project management approaches. Your complaints about budget constraints and timeline pressures helped me understand their resource allocation patterns and client relationship challenges." David was staring at the business card as if it might spontaneously combust, his worldview undergoing rapid reconstruction in ways that clearly caused him significant psychological discomfort. "You're saying this entire time, while I've been lecturing you about career success and professional achievement, you've actually been working in a position that's more senior than mine?" The realization was dawning on him gradually, each piece of new information requiring fundamental revision of assumptions he had never questioned. I could see him mentally reviewing years of conversations, comments, and condescending advice, recognizing how completely his understanding had been inverted. "Well," I said with deliberate understatement, "Regional Director of Operations for a multi-billion-dollar construction conglomerate does typically carry more responsibility and compensation than Senior Associate at a mid-tier law firm. But who's keeping track?" The casual dismissal of his professional achievements, delivered with the same patronizing tone he had used on me countless times, struck him with visible force. His face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and anger as he experienced the disorienting sensation of having his status suddenly and dramatically reduced. My grandmother, who had been observing this exchange with increasing fascination, leaned forward with obvious curiosity. "Emma, dear, if you have such an important position, why all the insecrecy? Why not just tell us the truth from the beginning?" The question came from genuine interest rather than accusation, and I appreciated her directness in cutting through the emotional complexity to focus on practical considerations. "Because, Grandma, successful corporate intelligence requires maintaining operational security until strategic objectives are achieved. If Morrison Development had known that Titan was evaluating them for acquisition, they would have altered their behavior in ways that would have compromised the authenticity of my assessment." I gestured toward Jessica, who was still staring at her phone in obvious shock. More importantly, if Jessica had known that her husband's family included a senior executive from a company considering the acquisition of her employer, it would have created serious conflicts of interest and potential legal complications for everyone involved. David's legal background was clearly helping him process these implications faster than the rest of the family. You're talking about insider trading concerns, corporate espionage allegations, ethics violations that could destroy careers and result in criminal charges. Exactly, I confirmed, nodding approvingly at his rapid comprehension. By maintaining operational security and allowing my family to continue believing I was professionally irrelevant, I protected everyone from potential legal exposure while ensuring the integrity of my assessment process. Jessica looked up from her phone with an expression that mixed horror with grudging recognition of my strategic thinking. The email says the acquisition is moving forward. Morrison Development is being integrated into Titan's regional operations, effective immediately. That's correct, I confirmed. The assessment phase has been completed, and the board has approved the acquisition based on my recommendation that Morrison represents an excellent strategic fit for our expansion goals. The information was delivered with professional neutrality, but I could see Jessica calculating the personal implications of working for a company that was being absorbed by an organization where her husband's sister held significant authority over her professional future. "What does this mean for my position?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the obvious stress she was experiencing. "Will I still have a job? Will my projects continue? What about my team?" These were reasonable questions from someone whose career stability had just been fundamentally altered by revelations that redefined every assumption she had made about power dynamics and professional relationships within her family network. "That depends," I replied, settling back in my chair with the relaxed confidence of someone holding all the strategic advantages, "on several factors that we'll need to evaluate during the integration process." I paused, allowing the weight of uncertainty to settle before continuing. Morrison's projects will continue under Titan oversight, though there will obviously be changes in management structure and operational procedures. Some positions will be eliminated due to redundancy with existing Titan capabilities. Others will be expanded to accommodate increased project scope and responsibility. Jessica's grip tightened on her phone as she processed information that could determine whether the career she had built over 5 years would survive the corporate transition. And my specific role, my projects, the clients I've been managing? "Your performance evaluation will begin Monday morning," I said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing routine administrative procedures. "I'll be conducting comprehensive assessment of all Morrison personnel to determine optimal placement within Titan's organizational structure. Some people will find new opportunities for advancement. Others may discover that their skills are better suited to different organizations." The veiled threat was delivered with professional courtesy, but its implications were unmistakable. Jessica's professional future now depended entirely on my assessment of her value to the organization, an assessment that would be conducted by someone who had just been subjected to an evening of condescending sympathy about her apparent lack of career success. David was beginning to understand the magnitude of the reversal that had just occurred. "You're saying that Jessica now works for you? That you have authority over her career decisions and professional development?" "I'm saying that Jessica now works for Titan Construction Group, where I serve as Regional Director of Operations with responsibility for personnel decisions, project allocation, and strategic planning across all development activities in this region." The clinical precision of my explanation somehow made the power dynamic even more stark. Jessica had gone from pitying her husband's unsuccessful sister to reporting to that same sister in a corporate hierarchy, where her professional survival depended on demonstrating value to someone she had just been patronizing about career choices. My Uncle Tom, who had been silent throughout these revelations, finally spoke with obvious amazement. "Emma, this is incredible. You've essentially orchestrated a complete reversal of everyone's assumptions while positioning yourself to take control of a major business opportunity. It's like something from a corporate thriller novel. The observation was accurate, though I had lived through each carefully planned step without the luxury of viewing it as entertainment. Strategic planning requires patience and the willingness to accept short-term disadvantages in service of long-term objectives, I explained. Sometimes the most effective approach is to let people underestimate you while you gather information and position yourself for optimal advantage. David was shaking his head slowly, his expression reflecting the difficulty of processing information that completely inverted his understanding of family dynamics and personal achievements. All those times I gave you advice about career planning, about getting serious about your professional future, about facing adult responsibilities, you were already more successful than I was, and you just let me lecture you? Your advice was always well-intentioned, I said with diplomatic generosity, though based on incomplete information about my actual circumstances and objectives. The careful phrasing acknowledged his concern while highlighting the arrogance of offering guidance about situations he didn't understand. David's face reflected growing awareness of how completely his condescension had been based on false assumptions about my capabilities and achievements. But why? My mother asked, her voice carrying the hurt of someone who felt betrayed by years of unnecessary worry. Why let us think you were struggling? Why let us worry about your future when you were actually doing so well? The question touched on the personal cost of maintaining operational security, the emotional price of allowing people I loved to believe I was failing when revealing the truth might have brought pride and celebration instead of concern and disappointment. Because success in corporate intelligence requires absolute commitment to operational priorities, I explained, though I could hear the inadequacy of professional justification for personal deception. The moment I revealed my real position, the entire assessment would have been compromised. Morrison Development would have altered their operations, Jessica would have faced impossible conflicts of interest, and the acquisition opportunity would have been destroyed. I looked around the table at faces that reflected various combinations of shock, hurt, and grudging admiration for strategic thinking that had completely escaped their detection. More importantly, I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with in both professional and personal contexts. The past 18 months have been extremely educational about family dynamics and individual character traits that might not have been apparent under different circumstances. The comment carried implications about what I had learned from observing their behavior when they believed I was professionally irrelevant and personally unsuccessful. David's expression suggested he was beginning to understand that his treatment of me during this period would now be viewed through the lens of how he handled relationships with people he perceived as inferior. Jessica was scrolling through her phone again, apparently reviewing corporate communications that took on new significance in light of her changed understanding of company ownership and management structure. The email mentions a mandatory staff meeting Monday morning to discuss transition procedures and personnel evaluations. I assume that's when you'll be revealing your role to the rest of the company. That's correct, I confirmed. The integration process will begin immediately, with comprehensive assessment of all projects, personnel, and operational procedures. Some changes will be announced Monday. Others will be implemented gradually as we determine optimal configurations. For combined operations, the business-like tone masked the personal satisfaction I felt at the prospect of finally stepping out of my carefully maintained disguise and revealing the real scope of my professional capabilities to people who had systematically underestimated them. My grandmother had been listening to this entire exchange with growing delight, her eyes bright with appreciation for strategic thinking that reminded her of her own experiences navigating complex social and business situations during her younger years. "Emma, dear," she said with obvious pride, "this is absolutely brilliant. You've managed to gather intelligence, position yourself advantageously, and protect your family from legal complications while achieving your professional objectives. I'm tremendously impressed. The approval from someone whose opinion I genuinely valued meant more than I had expected it would. Throughout the months of deception and careful planning, I had missed the ability to share my actual achievements with people who mattered to me. Thank you, Grandma, I replied with sincere gratitude. Though I have to admit, there were times when maintaining the facade became personally challenging. Watching David lecture me about career success while I was managing projects worth more than his annual income required considerable self-control. David winced visibly at this observation, clearly recognizing the irony of his position throughout the evening's earlier conversation. How long have you been planning this? The acquisition, the deception, all of it. Titan identified this region as a strategic opportunity about 2 years ago, I explained. I was assigned to conduct preliminary assessment 18 months ago, which required establishing credible local presence and developing intelligence about potential acquisition targets. Morrison Development emerged as the primary candidate about 14 months ago. I paused, allowing him to calculate the timeline and recognize how completely his understanding had been manipulated. The decision to maintain my existing family relationships as cover for the operation was made about a year ago, when it became clear that Jessica's employment at Morrison provided an ideal source of operational intelligence. Jessica's face had gone pale again as she processed the full scope of my strategic planning. You've been using our family conversations to gather information about my company for over a year? Every time I complained about work problems or described our projects, you were conducting corporate espionage? I was conducting legitimate business intelligence gathering, I corrected again, though I understood her feeling of betrayal. Everything I learned was information you shared voluntarily in social contexts. I never asked leading questions or attempted to extract confidential information through deception. The distinction was technically accurate, but emotionally insufficient to address her sense of having been manipulated by someone she had trusted as family. But you knew you were going to use that information to take over my company. You knew you were gathering intelligence that would affect my career and my future. I knew I was evaluating potential acquisition targets based on publicly available information and casual observations, I replied, with careful precision. My assessment of Morrison Development has been entirely based on legitimate business considerations, not personal relationships or family dynamics. David was studying my business card again, apparently accessing his phone to verify information that continued to contradict his established beliefs. Your LinkedIn profile shows project management experience on developments worth hundreds of millions of dollars, major corporate relocations, mixed-use facilities, public-private partnerships. This isn't just a senior position. This is executive-level responsibility in a major industry. The recognition was clearly difficult for him to accept, requiring fundamental revision of assumptions about our relative professional achievements and capabilities. I could see him struggling to reconcile the image of his unsuccessful sister with documented evidence of executive success that exceeded his own career accomplishments. Regional Director of Operations is indeed an executive position, I confirmed, with deliberate understatement. Titan Construction Group is one of the largest development companies in the country, with operations in 12 states and annual revenue approaching $3 billion. The financial scale provided additional context for Jessica's growing understanding of exactly how completely her professional world had been transformed by revelations that redefined every assumption about power relationships and career hierarchies within her family network. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "What happens to my job, my projects, my team? What happens between us as family?" The question addressed both professional and personal dimensions of our changed relationship, recognizing that corporate hierarchy would inevitably affect family dynamics in ways that none of us had previously needed to navigate. "Professionally," I said with clinical objectivity, "your performance evaluation will be conducted according to standard Titan procedures, based on project management capabilities, client relationship skills, and potential for contributing to expanded operations. Personal relationships will not factor into business decisions. I paused, softening my tone slightly to acknowledge the emotional complexity beneath professional considerations. Personally, I hope we can maintain family relationships despite the changed circumstances, though I imagine it will take some time for everyone to adjust to new realities. David was shaking his head again, apparently still struggling to process information that inverted everything he thought he understood about family dynamics and individual achievements. Emma, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. The things I said tonight, the assumptions I made, the advice I gave you about career planning and adult responsibilities. I was completely wrong about everything. The admission was clearly difficult for someone accustomed to being acknowledged as the family's professional success story and strategic thinker. I understand why you drew the conclusions you did, I replied with diplomatic generosity. The information available to you suggested a very different picture of my circumstances and capabilities. But you let me make those assumptions, he continued, his voice carrying genuine regret. You let me lecture you about success and achievement while you were already more accomplished than I was. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you at least hint that things weren't what they seemed? The question addressed the personal cost of operational security, the emotional price of allowing someone I cared about to diminish my achievements while positioning himself as superior based on false information about our relative accomplishments. Because revealing the truth would have compromised the entire operation, I explained, though I recognized the inadequacy of professional justification for personal deception. More importantly, I learned valuable information about character and relationship dynamics that might not have been apparent under different circumstances. The implication was clear enough that David understood I had been evaluating his behavior throughout the period when he believed I was professionally irrelevant. His treatment of me during that time would now be viewed as evidence of how he handled relationships with people he perceived as unsuccessful or inferior. "What did you learn?" he asked, though his expression suggested he might not want to hear the answer. "I learned that your concept of family support is conditional on professional achievement and social status," I replied with clinical honesty. "I learned that you're comfortable using other people's apparent failures as context for highlighting your own success. I learned that your advice and concern are motivated more by maintaining hierarchy than by genuine care for my well-being." The assessment was delivered without anger or accusation, but its accuracy was evident in David's expression as he recognized the truth of my observations about his behavior patterns. "I also learned," I continued, "that Jessica has better instincts about people and relationships than she's typically given credit for. Her attempts to moderate your comments and acknowledge my capabilities suggested character traits that weren't immediately apparent." Jessica looked up with surprise at this unexpected positive evaluation, clearly uncertain about whether my professional assessment of her personal qualities would translate into favorable consideration of her career prospects. The afternoon light was fading outside my grandmother's windows, casting longer shadows across the dining room table, where the remnants of our interrupted Thanksgiving dinner served as backdrop for revelations that had fundamentally altered family relationships and individual understanding of personal achievements and capabilities. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from my assistant in Chicago, undoubtedly requiring decisions about Monday's integration procedures and staff meetings. The outside world of corporate responsibility was reasserting itself, reminding me that this personal revelation was merely one component of a larger strategic operation that would continue unfolding according to schedules that had been established months earlier. "I need to take this call," I announced, rising from the table with the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to managing multiple complex operations simultaneously. "Jessica, I'll expect you at Monday's staff meeting. We'll discuss your specific role and future opportunities during your individual evaluation later that week." As I moved toward the privacy of my grandmother's study to handle the business call, I could hear the subdued conversation resuming behind me. family members attempting to process information that required complete revision of their understanding of individual achievements, relationship dynamics, and the distribution of power and success within our family structure. The transformation was complete. Emma Parker, the broke little sister working in coffee shops, had revealed herself as Emma Michelle Parker, Regional Director of Operations for Titan Construction Group, with authority over the professional future of the family member who had spent the evening pitying her apparent lack of success. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are those that require the patience to let others underestimate you while you position yourself for ultimate advantage. Sometimes the person everyone thinks they understand completely turns out to be someone entirely different. Someone who has been quietly building something significant while others were busy congratulating themselves on their superior achievements. The game had changed completely, and I was no longer playing defense. The business call lasted exactly 17 minutes, during which I coordinated Monday's integration timeline with my Chicago team while listening to the muffled sounds of intense family discussion filtering through my grandmother's study door. When I returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from shock to a kind of stunned acceptance, though the undercurrents of tension remained palpable. Jessica sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her phone face down, on the table as if she couldn't bear to look at any more corporate communications. David appeared to have aged several years during my absence, his earlier confidence replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been systematically dismantled. My parents looked concerned, but curious, while my grandmother watched me with barely concealed delight. "Everything settled?" Grandma asked, with the knowing tone of someone who had spent decades observing family power dynamics and appreciated strategic brilliance when she encountered it. "The transition team is prepared for Monday's announcements," I confirmed, settling back into my chair with the relaxed posture of someone whose long-term planning had finally reached its intended conclusion. "All departmental assessments will begin Tuesday, with individual evaluations scheduled throughout the week." Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. "How many people are going to lose their jobs?" The question carried both professional concern and personal anxiety, reflecting her growing understanding that corporate acquisitions typically involved significant workforce reductions and organizational restructuring. "That depends entirely on performance evaluations and operational requirements," I replied with clinical objectivity. "Titan's policy is to retain valuable personnel while eliminating redundancies and underperforming positions." I paused, allowing the weight of uncertainty to settle before adding, "Your individual outcome will be determined by your demonstrated capabilities, project management record, and potential for contributing to expanded operations under new management structure." David had been quiet since my return, apparently using the time to process implications that extended far beyond immediate family embarrassment. "Emma," he said finally, his voice carrying a gravity I had rarely heard from him, "I need to understand something. This entire operation, the intelligence gathering, the strategic positioning, the acquisition planning. How long have you been working at this level of corporate responsibility?" The question addressed his growing recognition that my professional achievements represented not recent developments, but established capabilities that had been systematically concealed from family observation. "I've been with Titan for 6 years, I explained, starting as a project coordinator in their Denver office after completing my MBA. The regional director position came through a combination of successful project completions and strategic planning, capabilities that senior management found valuable. I could see him calculating timelines, recognizing that my professional advancement had been occurring simultaneously with his own career development, though hidden beneath the carefully maintained facade of underachievement and career confusion. 6 years, he repeated slowly. "You've been building this level of success for 6 years while letting us think you were struggling to find direction." "Not exactly letting you think," I corrected with gentle precision. "More like choosing not to correct assumptions that served my operational requirements." There's a significant difference between active deception and strategic omission of information that others don't need to possess. My mother's expression reflected the complex emotions of someone who felt simultaneously proud of my achievements and hurt by the deception that had hidden them. "Emma, sweetheart, I understand why you couldn't reveal your real job, but did you have to let us worry about you for so long? All those conversations about your future, all that concern about your financial security and career prospects?" The question touched on the personal cost of operational security, the emotional price of allowing people I loved to experience unnecessary anxiety about my well-being in service of strategic objectives that I couldn't explain without compromising their integrity. "I know it caused worry," I acknowledged, "and I'm genuinely sorry about that aspect of the situation. But revealing my real position would have created legal and ethical complications that could have destroyed both the business opportunity and potentially exposed family members to charges of insider trading or corporate espionage." Uncle Tom leaned forward with obvious curiosity about the legal dimensions I had referenced. "You're talking about securities violations? Criminal liability for family members who weren't even aware of the corporate relationships involved?" "Exactly," I confirmed, nodding appreciatively at his quick comprehension of the complex legal landscape that had shaped my operational constraints. The moment any family member became aware that I held executive authority over a company being considered for acquisition, particularly if that family member had personal relationships with employees of the target company, we would have entered territory involving potential insider trading, conflict of interest violations, and corporate espionage allegations. David's legal training was clearly helping him understand these implications with growing recognition of how carefully I had navigated regulatory requirements while protecting family members from unwitting participation in potentially criminal activity. "You're saying that if I had known about your real position and Jessica's employment at Morrison, even casual conversations about her work could have constituted illegal information sharing?" "Potentially," I confirmed. "Corporate intelligence gathering operates under strict legal guidelines designed to prevent exactly those kinds of ethical violations. By maintaining operational security and ensuring that family members remained unaware of corporate relationships, I protected everyone from potential legal exposure while preserving the integrity of the assessment process." Jessica looked up with an expression that mixed grudging respect with continued personal betrayal. "So you were protecting us by lying to us? Making us complicit in corporate espionage by keeping us ignorant of what was actually happening?" The accusation carried legitimate emotional weight, even as it demonstrated incomplete understanding of the legal and ethical frameworks that had guided my operational decisions. "I was protecting you by ensuring that your actions remained entirely innocent of any knowledge that could create legal liability," I explained. "Everything you shared about Morrison Development was information you would have shared with any family member in casual conversation. The difference was that I had professional context for evaluating that information, context that you couldn't possess without creating regulatory violations." My grandmother had been following this exchange with the sharp attention of someone who had spent her own career navigating complex business and social relationships during an era when women's professional advancement required exceptional strategic thinking. "Emma," she said with obvious admiration, "you've essentially orchestrated a perfect information operation while protecting everyone involved from legal consequences. That requires sophisticated understanding of both corporate intelligence and regulatory compliance." The recognition from someone whose opinion I genuinely valued carried particular significance, especially since she was the only family member who had consistently treated my apparent underachievement with skepticism rather than acceptance. "Thank you, Grandma." Though I have to admit that maintaining the operational facade became increasingly challenging as David's lectures about career success grew more frequent and pointed. David winced again at the reference to his condescending advice. Clearly, understanding that every conversation in which he had positioned himself as the successful sibling offering guidance to his struggling sister had been based on completely inverted understanding of our actual professional achievements and capabilities. "How did you manage it?" he asked with genuine curiosity about operational tradecraft that had completely escaped his detection. "How did you maintain a convincing facade of financial struggle while holding an executive position that presumably pays substantially more than my legal salary?" The question addressed practical aspects of long-term strategic deception that required careful attention to countless details that could have revealed inconsistencies in my maintained persona. "Operational security requires absolute commitment to role authenticity," I explained. "I maintained a separate apartment and vehicle consistent with my cover employment, used different banking accounts for personal expenses that family members might observe, and carefully controlled all aspects of my public presence to support the established narrative." I paused, allowing him to appreciate the scope of planning required to sustain such comprehensive deception over extended periods. More importantly, I genuinely worked part-time at Central Perk Coffee, which provided authentic cover for my daily activities while allowing me to maintain local presence for intelligence gathering and relationship development. Jessica was shaking her head slowly, apparently still struggling to process the complete reversal of everything she had believed about family dynamics and individual achievements. "All those times I felt sorry for you. All those conversations, where I tried to be encouraging about your job search and career prospects. You were actually evaluating my company for acquisition while I was patronizing you about professional development. You were being kind and supportive based on the information available to you," I replied with diplomatic generosity. "Your concern was genuine, even though it was based on false premises about my actual circumstances." The careful phrasing acknowledged her good intentions while highlighting the irony of her position throughout our previous interactions. She had been offering career advice and emotional support to someone whose professional achievements significantly exceeded her own, while unknowingly providing intelligence that would determine her own employment future. "What happens now?" my father asked, apparently deciding to address practical implications rather than continuing to process the emotional complexity of family deception and professional revelations. "How do we move forward with these changed circumstances?" The question addressed both immediate family relationships and longer-term dynamics that would need to accommodate completely altered understanding of individual achievements and capabilities. "Professionally," I said, "the acquisition proceeds according to established timelines, with Morrison Development being integrated into Titan's regional operations under my oversight. Jessica's employment status will be determined through standard evaluation procedures based on demonstrated performance and potential for contributing to expanded operations." I looked directly at Jessica as I continued. "Personally, I hope we can maintain family relationships despite the changed circumstances, though I recognize that everyone will need time to adjust to new realities." David had been unusually quiet during this exchange, apparently engaged in extensive mental revision of assumptions that had shaped his understanding of family hierarchy and individual success for several years. "Emma," he said finally, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you recognition for achievements that I completely failed to perceive, and acknowledgement that my treatment of you throughout this period was based on arrogance and condescension that were entirely unjustified." The admission was clearly difficult for someone accustomed to being acknowledged as the family's primary example of professional success and strategic thinking. "I also need to recognize," he continued, "that you've demonstrated planning capabilities and operational execution that exceed anything I've accomplished in my legal career." The recognition was genuinely meaningful, representing acknowledgement from someone whose opinion had mattered to me despite his systematic underestimation of my capabilities. "Thank you," I replied sincerely, "though I hope you understand that maintaining operational security required allowing misconceptions to persist that were personally difficult to accept." My phone buzzed again with another priority message, this time from Titan's legal department regarding regulatory filings that would need to be completed before Monday's public announcements. The outside world of corporate responsibility continued to assert itself, reminding me that this family revelation represented only one component of a larger strategic operation that would require continued attention and management. "I need to handle some urgent legal documentation," I announced, glancing at the message preview. "Jessica, you should receive additional communications over the weekend regarding Monday's staff meeting and transition procedures. I suggest reviewing Morrison's project files and preparing comprehensive summaries of your current responsibilities and client relationships." The instruction was delivered with the professional authority of a superior providing guidance to a subordinate, marking the formal establishment of our new corporate relationship. Jessica nodded with obvious nervousness, clearly understanding that her career future now depended on demonstrating value to someone who had just been revealed as holding significant power over her professional prospects. As I prepared to leave for my apartment to handle the weekend's corporate communications and strategic planning, my grandmother rose from her chair with the dignified bearing that had characterized her presence throughout the afternoon's dramatic revelations. "Emma, dear," she said, approaching me with obvious pride, "I want you to know how impressed I am with what you've accomplished. The strategic thinking, the operational execution, the protection of family interests while achieving your professional objectives. It reminds me of my own experiences navigating complex business situations when women weren't expected to possess such capabilities." Her approval meant more than any corporate recognition or professional advancement, representing validation from someone whose judgment I had always respected and whose love had never been conditional on external measures of success or achievement. "Thank you, Grandma," I replied, embracing her with genuine gratitude. "Your support throughout my life gave me the confidence to pursue opportunities that others might have found intimidating or inappropriate." As I gathered my belongings and prepared to depart, I looked around the dining room where my carefully maintained facade had finally been abandoned in favor of authentic representation of my actual capabilities and achievements. The afternoon had transformed family relationships in ways that would require ongoing adjustment and renegotiation, but it had also freed me from the burden of concealing professional success that I had earned through years of strategic planning and skillful execution. David approached as I reached the doorway, his expression reflecting complex emotions that mixed embarrassment with genuine respect for accomplishments he was still processing. "Emma," he said quietly, "I know I don't have any right to ask this after everything that's happened, but I'd like to understand how you developed the strategic thinking and operational capabilities that made this possible. Not for any professional reason, but because I'm genuinely curious about my sister's achievements that I completely failed to recognize." The request was delivered with humility that represented significant change from his earlier condescending confidence. "Strategy and planning are skills that develop through experience and education," I explained. My MBA program emphasized corporate intelligence and competitive analysis, which provided theoretical framework for practical application in complex business environments. I paused, considering how much additional detail to provide about professional development that had occurred entirely outside his awareness. More importantly, success in corporate intelligence requires understanding human psychology and organizational behavior in ways that extend beyond technical knowledge or academic credentials. The comment carried implications about observational skills and strategic thinking that had been evident throughout our family interactions, capabilities that he had failed to recognize despite years of direct exposure to their application. "I'll be interested to see how Morrison's integration proceeds," he said, with what appeared to be genuine professional curiosity rather than personal concern about family dynamics. Corporate acquisitions of this scale must involve incredibly complex coordination of legal, financial, and operational considerations. "They do," I confirmed, appreciating his recognition of the scope and complexity involved in the strategic operation that was reaching its culmination. Though successful integration depends more on human factors than technical procedures. Understanding individual motivations, managing organizational culture changes, maintaining client relationships during transition periods. Jessica had been listening to our exchange while apparently reviewing additional corporate communications on her phone. "Emma," she said as I prepared to leave, "I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, despite feeling manipulated and deceived, I recognize that you've been professional throughout this entire process. You gathered information that I shared voluntarily. You protected us from legal complications we couldn't have understood. And you've handled the revelation with more consideration than I probably deserved." The acknowledgement was unexpected and genuinely appreciated, representing maturity and professional insight that boded well for her potential success during the evaluation process that would determine her employment future. "Thank you," I replied sincerely. "I hope you understand that the deception wasn't personal, and that your performance evaluation will be conducted entirely on professional merits without consideration of family relationships or personal feelings about the circumstances that led to this transition." As I drove away from my grandmother's house, leaving behind family members who were still processing revelations that had fundamentally altered their understanding of individual achievements and relationship dynamics, I reflected on the complex emotions that accompanied the successful completion of strategic objectives that had required 18 months of careful planning and meticulous execution. The satisfaction of professional accomplishment was tempered by awareness of personal costs that had been necessary to maintain operational security. Allowing people I loved to worry about my future while concealing achievements that might have brought pride and celebration had required emotional discipline that was difficult to sustain over extended periods. Yet the alternative would have been worse. Revealing my real position would have destroyed the business opportunity while exposing family members to potential legal consequences that they couldn't have anticipated or avoided. The operational security that had seemed like personal betrayal had actually been a form of protection that preserved both professional objectives and family relationships. Monday morning would bring new challenges as Morrison Development staff learned about the acquisition and integration procedures that would determine their employment futures. Jessica's evaluation would be conducted with the same professional objectivity applied to all personnel assessments, though I hoped her demonstrated intelligence and project management capabilities would translate into opportunities for advancement within Titan's expanded operations. David's recognition of my achievements, however belated, represented an important shift in family dynamics that had been shaped by his systematic underestimation of my capabilities. Our relationship would require ongoing renegotiation as he adjusted to understanding his sister as a professional peer rather than someone requiring guidance and career advice. Most importantly, the successful completion of this strategic operation established a foundation for future opportunities that would no longer require concealment or deception. Emma Michelle Parker, Regional Director of Operations for Titan Construction Group, could finally represent herself authentically in both professional and personal contexts. The game had indeed changed completely, and I was no longer playing defense. The strategic patience that had allowed others to underestimate me while I positioned myself for ultimate advantage had paid dividends that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are those that require the discipline to accept temporary disadvantage in service of long-term strategic objectives. The person everyone thought they understood completely had revealed herself to be someone entirely different, someone who had been quietly building something significant, while others were busy congratulating themselves on their apparent superior achievements. The transformation was complete, and the future belonged to those who understood that true power comes not from appearance or assumption, but from capability and strategic positioning that others fail to recognize until it's too late to adjust their own strategies accordingly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.